So we've talked about how you create a brand and what it takes to be a good brand, and I told you how important the naming is. One of the things that becomes very significant is understanding what really is a good brand and what is a not so good brand name. Looking at that, we're going to take a look at some good brand names and some bad brand names. And some of you might say, oh, I thought that was really good. We're going to explain how costly it can be, how complicated it can be if you select a name for the product that's not particularly well suited, and you have to spend huge amounts of money and time and resources to get people to recognize it. In contrast, there are sometimes some that have been pretty quick to catch on. So some of the good ones are things like Sony and Pickup Sticks and Victoria's Secret and Google. Let's take a look at a few of them. Sony is a Japanese brand. Mr. Morita is the founder of the company, and unlike most Japanese companies that name it their family name, it was not named Morita, as was Yamaha, Toyota, Honda, Mitsubishi. Those are Japanese family names. Mr. Morita wanted to be able to sell globally, and so he crafted a name that sort of sounded like sound or sonar, that sort of sounded like the name Sonny, Sonny, also had a very positive effect and was in fact pronounceable in every language. A very quick one is Pickup Sticks, which gives you an idea sort of what they do. Doesn't tell you exactly and completely what they do. And by the way, if you don't know, this one was actually partially owned by McDonald's for a period of time, kind of beefed up what they did and how they marketed. If your name is Wetzel, I think you have to make pretzels. It sounds really sort of corny, but rhythm, alliteration, repetition in marketing is extremely good. This is another one that has a brilliant name. The company is a little bit nefarious, and I do say company. Most people associate Goodwill Industries, put it in the same category with someone like Salvation Army. Salvation Army is a charity, a genuine, honest to God charity that has been around for decades, probably more than a century. Goodwill Industries is a company. The president of the company makes millions of dollars. They still encourage you to donate your clothes and then go and buy back clothes from them. They tell you that they create jobs. What company doesn't create jobs? Their name, Goodwill, well, it must be a good cause. And you kind of lump it in together with the Salvation Army concept when in fact it is an entirely different category. Now, the next one is one that might baffle you guys a little bit. I suspect the majority of you don't actually know where Victoria's Secret's name comes from, but it is a brilliant naming strategy. What happens here is we have to go back probably somewhere, I don't know, 1960s, 1970s. And then, as now, you think about where women went to buy underwear, nightgowns, lingerie. There weren't a lot of places. Even today, Victoria's Secret has very few competitors. It's a fairly limited marketplace, and Victoria's Secret has conquered the lion's share of the market. If you just walk through the mall and look at the frontage that the Victoria's Secret stores have, it's very prime real estate. They take up a lot of space. That is not cheap, and they sell very tiny little things. Now, that was not the case when Victoria's Secret as a concept was first introduced back 50 or 60 years ago. There was a huge amount of pushback from women because prior to that, they bought their underwear at Macy's or JCPenney's or Sears. It was very proper and it was very conservative. And the idea of going to a store that sold kind of fancy bras and panties and nightgowns and all kinds of things like that, ooh, that was absolutely unthinkable. So the folks who started the company developed a very good name, and they named it after Queen Victoria. This is Queen Victoria. Queen Victoria, who reigned Britain from 1837 to 1901, as you can see, is very pompous and very proud and very concept of the Victorian period, which was very, very proper, comes from Queen Victoria. In fact, it's sort of odd that she's got a big a huge jeweled necklace on here, but often you would actually see Queen Victoria with a very high collar and not any part of her showing except her hands and a bit of her face. So everyone associates Victoria with propriety. But in reality, this is Queen Victoria. Here's Victoria, and here's her husband, Prince Albert, whom she loved very much. And they had 9 children. Obviously, Victoria had a secret in the bedroom. And consequently, they named the store Victoria's Secret. And the first stores, and this is part of the reason for the pink and the very feminine and the very proper, many of the original stores were designed like a Victorian boudoir, and they would actually have garments sort of hanging off out of the dresser drawers or off the knobs, suggesting that once again, even someone as proper as Victoria, you never quite knew what she was wearing under her dresses or what she was doing in the bedroom. Today, most of you simply know Victoria's Secret. You went shopping with your mom, and you remember she walked out with the little pink bag, and when she walked into the house at home and Dad saw the little pink bag, ooh, Dad got all excited. Dad knew Mom had a secret. Probably one of the best names ever is Google. I'm going to explain to you where it comes from, but I also want you to understand that this company was founded by Paige and Bryn. And these 2 guys one was originally a doctoral student at Stanford. The other one was visiting, looking at becoming a doctoral student at Stanford. One of the professors asked the one who was currently there, would he take the other one around on the weekend? And they didn't like each other. But they also knew that what was in the head of one matched what was in the head of the other, and that they could create something great in the way of search engines. By the way, today they like each other very much, and they're very rich, happy friends. But they came up with this concept. And for 2 nerds, 2 geeks, I have to give them an A++ on naming. They came up not only with a great name, but if you ever listen to any interviews with them, they will tell you that they brainstormed over 1,000 names. Now, why is Google so good? Because we all know Google. We can read Google almost anywhere. They got the name from a Googleplex. A Googleplex is a scientific term that means a 10 followed by 100 zeros. Okay, it is a very large scientific term, a very large scientific number, kind of meaning infinite. So in other words, if you sit down to Google something, you will get an infinite number of responses. But these boys, Paige and Bryn, were smart enough to know that most Americans can't spell. So if we take Google the way it is actually spelled in Googleplex, and it's Googol, most Americans couldn't spell it. If you can't type in Google, you can't Google. So they played around with it a lot, and they came up with Google, Google, the way we know it, because it has not only the affinity to a Googleplex, but to goggles and to ogle. So when you are searching, you are looking for an unlimited number. And they ended up with Google. And think about how well we know Google. I personally think one of the greatest jobs in the world would be the keeper of the Google homepage. The person who every day, this is probably Sesame Street's 40th or 41st birthday, comes up with the idea of how we're actually going to write Google. This is on I Love Lucy's 100th birthday, and you could click on here and would actually play a whole episode. I think this one's a little hard to read. You really have to be able to kind of fit that one in and see that that's Google. But I think that is one of the most amazing names. The day that Google was going public, back somewhere around, I don't know, around 2007 or 2008, I was leaving for school in the morning, and I said to my husband, Google's going public today, buy Google. And when I came home that night, I said, did you buy shares of Google? And he said, no, the price went too high. And I was mad at him for a while about that. But he said to me then, why did you tell me to buy Google? I didn't even know you knew about Google. And I said, are you kidding me? Of course I know about Google. And it's already a verb before it has its IPO. Before it has an initial public offering, it's already a verb. That's a significant brand. So if those are good ones, what are some not so good ones? A couple of bad brand names, and again, at least at the outset. Now, we have come to know some of them and know some of them reasonably well. But from the beginning, if you were to introduce some of these brand names today, I'm not sure that they would click very well, if they clicked at all. And the first one is Yahoo, one of Google's competitors. What does Yahoo mean? An idiot. So while Google is looking at a very large scientific number, Yahoo, who told us Yahoo, is an idiot. And we wonder why Yahoo is dying and Google is thriving. Ruth's Chris Steakhouse, great steaks. If it's graduation, you can convince your parents and grandparents to take you out for your big dinner at Ruth's Chris. It's great, but it's the dumbest name you can possibly imagine. Originally, a guy named Chris owned a chain of steakhouses. Ruth bought them and just stuck her name on the front end. Another product that we all know, it is well over 100 years old. It's probably celebrated its birthday in about 2014. It's been around for a long time. And even the folks at Nabisco who make Oreo cookies have no idea where the name comes from. They do not know what it means. It has no connotations, no meaning. We've just gotten used to it. And you say, yeah, well, we can all get used to it. But if you introduce something like Oreo today, it would take a lot more time for people to become familiar with it. Again, Nabisco, which is based in Boston, even says they cannot make any sense of why they're called Oreo cookies. Because when they are developing a new product, at least at that point in time, they would actually sort of have a concept. They'd be testing it in the concept stage. They'd be testing it in terms of taste tests, etc. And they would usually name it after a local city somewhere around Boston. So for instance, when they were making these funny little fig bars around 1915, 1920, they named it after the city of Newton and they became Fig Newtons. And they said, well, what the heck? We'll let them go that way. But it's a name that has no meaning, no sense. You all know Starbucks. You all have lots of associations that go with Starbucks. There are associations with coffee, but they're crazy associations. And even if you look at the Starbucks logo, which we all know really well, and contrast it with the original logo. By the way, if you go to the original Starbucks in Pike's Place in Seattle, this logo is still on the front of that building. Personally, I think the brown kind of makes more sense because it is the same color as coffee. Green doesn't really make all that much sense for coffee. It doesn't really make that much sense with the Starbucks logo, with the Starbucks mermaid. Granted, the old mermaid is a little bit more risque, a little more pornographic. But why do I say it's a dumb name? What does it have to do with coffee? It is really long and convoluted. Way beyond what I have time to explain to you, but believe me, it comes from a very convoluted portion of the whaling book about Moby Dick and Captain Starbucks and Captain Ahab. And Captain Starbucks drank a lot of coffee to stay awake. Today, we all know it's what it means, but it doesn't make sense. You all know IKEA. I'm sure most of you have furniture, home furnishings in your apartment or house from IKEA, but Ingmar Kamprad, IK, who was from the village of Elmintard in the province of Antwerp, or Antvil, in Sweden, just took 4 initials. It's kind of an acronym, but it's a stupid acronym. It's not even as good as IBM or KFC. Again, we all know it, but it's kind of senseless. Now, I've told you guys that you would like for your brand name, your product to become nicknamed most of the time. Many of you remember Washington Mutual Bank. Washington Mutual exists no longer. It kind of went under in bad times in the recession. But the problem with one of the big problems with Washington Mutual was it got a nickname. It was too long for customers to say Washington Mutual, so they started calling it WAMU. You do not want a stupid name like WAMU for a bank. It sounds like something you order in a Chinese restaurant. I'll have a poo-poo platter and I'll have a WAMU. A bank needs to sound official. This is one of the odd situations where you really don't want this. Airbnb, I suspect most of you have no idea. You kind of know what B&B means. Do you know why it's called Airbnb? Because the first guys who started it and rented out one room had an air mattress. Dumb name. And probably one of the dumbest names of all time is a camel. Who in God's name would ever want to smoke a Camel? Yes, we all know it. It's a brand of cigarette now that has a reasonable market share. But seriously, you look at this Camel in the desert next to the pyramids. Oh, that sounds really refreshing. If someone were stupid enough to try and introduce a cigarette brand today called Camel, they would get what they deserve. Not much. And I will let you guys figure out if Boogie Wipes and their advertising tagline make any sense. Kind of an odd one. So those are some bad ones, and those are some good ones. And that takes us to the issue of brand equity. You have read about brand equity. Brand equity is a concept that's always sort of existed. In fact, when you do accounting, when you're in your accounting 201 and 202, and you have to do the balance sheets, and sometimes when you come to the bottom and the one side doesn't exactly equal the other side, the difference is goodwill. Well, brand equity is a very large category of goodwill. Brand equity came to be very popular, very important after the introduction of New Coke. When Coca-Cola realized the equity they had in the Coca-Cola brand, to the point that people went crazy, protested, made them go back and recan, repackage, rebottle the classic Coke. Coca-Cola came to all of us who were teachers at the time and said, we learned a really, really big lesson. Please make sure that students in the future do not make such stupid mistakes. And from that point in 1985, I think probably starting in 1986, several companies, several researchers started calculating brand equity. Brand equity is more than just features and benefits. I'm going to give you a very, very simple definition, and that is, it is roughly taking market capitalization and subtracting the tangibles, very roughly again. Okay, so if I went out and I bought all the shares of a company, and every single share on the market cost me $100,000. And then after I bought it, I was just really stupid and fickle and said, I don't really want it. And I sold off all the tangibles, and I only got, out of my $100 million, I only got $75 million. The difference would be the brand equity. It is that intangible set of qualities. Let's look at an example, okay? An example would be Starbucks. Starbucks has significant features that relate to its brand. You don't go to Starbucks to buy a beer. You don't go to Starbucks to buy fashion. You don't go to Starbucks to buy even watered down coffee. Okay, there are distinct brand features, but they also wrap those features in some very rational brand benefits. And benefits go beyond actually just the features of the product. And then Starbucks, like some of the very successful authentic marketing companies. We talked about authentic marketing way back in chapter 1. And that this is really what you want, where consumers connect with your product. This is where we're looking at emotional brand connection. And sometimes we talk here about things like trust and interaction and relationship and appreciation and respect. And things that kind of sound like something you don't talk about in a business school, but you talk about in a sociology class across campus somewhere. But what Starbucks has done incredibly successfully, they've taken core brand features. They have a lot of caffeine. If you don't know how caffeinated their beverages are, you might be in for a surprise. Every 2 or 3 years, the New York Times does a study. They go out and they test a couple of different kinds of coffee, and they'll take the same size, like a 12 ounce or something, and they'll test Dunkin' Donuts and McDonald's and Pete's and, of course, Starbucks. And Starbucks invariably has 63% more than the average cup of coffee for that same size. It comes with very distinct spices. It comes with the cream. It's very sweet. When we then add in the benefits, what is it that Starbucks ads in terms of rational brand benefits? Well, a cup of coffee is warming, it tastes good, it's very filling. But what Starbucks does at the emotional level goes way beyond just that. At this level, they're adding in the concepts of personalization. We've talked about that before, how well they validate the individual in America. You rattle off that great big long name of whatever coffee you want, and they recite it back to you. Then they ask you your name, and they write the name down for you. They understand how important the barista is, particularly in the morning. The baristas have, in many cases, kind of replaced mom in American society, because for a lot of people, the barista is truly the first person that someone actually talks to in the morning. And above all, one of the things that Howard Schultz, who was not the founder of Starbucks, but the person who came in and sort of turned it into a global entity and understood the marketing of it, and recently stepped down as the CEO. He understands and wants to create Starbucks as your third place. Third place meaning that the place you are most comfortable is at home. The second place you're most comfortable is at school or at work, where you have your own little world and your own little environment. And the third place he wants to be Starbucks, so that when you walk into your Starbucks, you have your table and you can go and stay there for 2 or 3 or 4 hours and feel like you're home, you're safe, you're relaxed. And if you don't believe me, think about, let me just zoom in here on this one. Think about how important some of the crazy concepts like pumpkin spice latte are. Pumpkin spice latte is only available in the fall at Starbucks, but when they announce the date on which it's coming back, oh, people get so excited, and there's Facebook sites and there's websites all about, oh my, pumpkin spice is coming back. That's pretty amazing. That's really authentic marketing. So taking this, let's look at how we calculate brand equity. And in the old days, I used to just pretty much give everybody the top 10, but in the last few years, there's been a lot of shifting. So what we're going to look at here is, I'm going to take you out of that one. We're going to look at this. And Interbrand is probably the company that does the best job at calculating brand equity. You see the ranking here. Apple is now number 1. From 1986 until about 2013, 2014, Coca-Cola was number 1. Number 1 in brand equity. The brand equity that Coke has, and it dropped a little bit this year. The brand equity that Coke has is $78 billion. That's not $78 billion in sales. That's not $78 billion in net worth. That's $78 billion just what people believe in Coke. Again, if you went out and bought all the shares of Coca-Cola at market value and then sold off everything tangible, including even things like trademarks and copyrights, you'd have a discrepancy of about $78 billion. You know what, gang? These people make colored, carbonated water, and they have $78 billion worth of value in what you and I believe in Coke. There are many countries on the planet whose total GDP is not $78 billion. Number 1 is Apple, and Apple's got $170 billion worth of brand equity. Number 2 is Google, and Google has 120. And you can see here, and then these guys, Google and Apple, have moved pretty rapidly in the last few years. Coke, Microsoft, IBM, Toyota, Samsung is probably going to drop with the exploding phones. General Electric and McDonald's, BMW and Mercedes and Disney and Intel. These guys have all been at the top. Amazon, you can see here again, Amazon has made a huge, huge increase. And Amazon has about $37 billion worth of brand equity. As you look at some of the others that are on this list, companies like H&M, Gillette, and Gillette is a product of Procter & Gamble, as is Pampers. Because they are a wide but short product offering, with every product under a different brand name, they can't aggregate their whole brand equity like General Electric can. So for them to have Gillette worth $22 billion and Pampers worth $15 billion, that's pretty significant. Let me take you then to look very quickly at the fifth P and just think a little bit about the importance of packaging in the whole grand scheme of things. It has become very significant. There are some people who joke about, as we saw here, and they do kind of joke about it becoming the fifth P. In reality, it will never, I don't think it will ever become the fifth P, but the reason is packaging has become a really big deal. There's been quite a few things that have changed. One is just how sophisticated the packaging is. One is because a lot of people are buying products without any salesperson's help. How many things do you actually have a salesperson who's helping you? So the package has to do a very big job of selling products when it's on the shelf. The second thing is the fact that there is tremendous, tremendous advertising clutter. And it is really, really expensive to pay for advertising. A 30-second ad on a typical primetime show, it's going to cost you at least $400,000. A really high priority one, like maybe at this point, Big Bang Theory, will cost you more than $500,000, and you have to buy 13 of them straight out. So that's $6.5 million. So your package is going to do a lot of the marketing, and a good package can maybe sell a lot in the store. There's tremendous technology in terms of improving packaging and improving materials. And we can look at some of these. There are some things that have become really very clever in terms of how they can package even things like citrus fruits. Certainly we have the small packs, like here we have the ketchup, that are able to give you a little bit more than the traditional packages. I love this one. This is if you don't want someone to steal your kid's lunch at school, you buy these lunch bags that already have what looks like mold on them, and then you put your kid's food in there, and then the other kids won't steal it. We want packaging that is really advanced and really technologically sophisticated, that you can package things even in a bullet pack like this for a pair of Adidas. We've talked a little bit before, and we will talk a lot more when we get to the chapters on retailing and distribution about logistics. There have been tremendous, tremendous changes made in terms of how we ship products and how we distribute them and how we keep track of them. So that if we look at some of the things that happen, this is a warehouse, and they can just go through the warehouse and pick orders really easily. And then the orders are kind of flying around on this matrix grid and going into, they're getting automatically picked and thrown into a box, and maybe your order is order number 6 and my order is order number 3. These boxes are just rolling across the grid. We use very sophisticated labeling and very sophisticated equipment in order to pack and ship. And then, of course, one of the other things that's really important about packaging is that you can use the packaging to reinforce the advertising. Maybe you run a particular ad, like the pink Ever Ready Energizer Bunny. So someone watches that ad, and then they go in the store, and batteries are really hard to discriminate. Is it the Duracell, the copper top one? Is it the Energizer? Is it which particular brand of batteries was it? You put the little pink bunny on the package on the shelf in the store, and you have the consumer able to actually identify which one they bought.